Morbid Facts about the cast of Stranger Things, Part 1. Before playing Vecna, Jamie Campbell Bower spiraled into heroin addiction and said he was 1 week away from dying. He's talked about waking up in places he didn't remember, overdosing, and losing control of his life. He eventually entered rehab, got sober, and described the experience as surviving the darkest years of his life. Before Stranger Things made him famous, Joe Keery survived a serious car accident that easily could have killed him. The car flipped and was completely wrecked, and he later said he only walked away because the airbags deployed at the exact right moment. The crash left him shaken for years, realizing how close he'd come to death before anyone knew his name. Gaten Matarazzo was born with cleidocranial dysplasia, a condition so rare it affects less than 1 in a million people. It left him without collarbones, caused severe skull and dental abnormalities, and forced him into repeated surgeries to expose impacted teeth and install prosthetics. The condition itself can cause brittle bones, dangerous airway problems, and lifelong complications. Before Stranger Things, he was rejected from audition after audition for his appearance, but the show ultimately wrote his real disorder into Dustin's character, and Gaten now uses his platform to raise awareness for those living with CCD. Morbid Facts about the cast of Stranger Things, Part 2. Grace Van Dien, aka Chrissy, revealed that she was groomed by a producer while working on another project, an experience she said left her traumatized enough to step away from acting entirely. She described it as one of the darkest times of her life, saying Hollywood had become unsafe for her and that the incident permanently changed how she views the industry. Before Stranger Things, Brett Gelman endured years of darkness, losing his younger brother in a sudden tragedy, spiraling through severe depression. That's while he struggled to afford rent and avoid homelessness. He says he was quietly blacklisted in Hollywood for speaking out against abusive workplaces, leaving him convinced his career would be over before it ever started. Mark Steger, the performer inside the Demogorgon suit, has said the role was one of the most physically dangerous of his career. The practical suit trapped extreme heat, restricted movement, and weighed so much that he repeatedly suffered heat exhaustion, ligament strain, and even collapsed during takes. At one point, he collapsed so fast the crew thought he'd gone into cardiac arrest. Steger said the Demogorgon required total body endurance just to survive filming days. This was the shocking moment her family realized they'd made a horrific mistake. In Thailand, a 65-year-old woman who was presumed dead stunned mourners when she suddenly started knocking from inside her coffin just moments before cremation. Her family had believed she'd passed away after appearing to stop breathing 2 days earlier, so she was transported hundreds of miles to a Bangkok area temple for her funeral. But just as monks were preparing the cremation rites, staff heard faint thuds coming from the coffin and opened it to find her alive, barely moving, eyes fluttering, and severely weakened from critically low blood sugar. Temple workers later said the knocking was so faint they almost dismissed it as part of the ritual drum sounds, meaning she was seconds away from being burned alive without anyone noticing. The discovery sparked outrage over how she was declared dead without a medical exam, and how close she came to cremation after laying unconscious in a sealed coffin for 2 days. She was rushed to the hospital and is now in stable condition, recovering under medical supervision after narrowly surviving her own funeral. Just last week, 26-year-old Bethany McGee was riding the Blue Line in Chicago when a stranger walked up, poured a flammable liquid on her, and set her on fire. Police say 50-year-old Lawrence Reed didn't say a word before igniting her, then chased her through the train car as she burned and screamed. She soon stumbled out of the train with devastating, life-threatening burns while other commuters simply watched in horror. Reed was arrested minutes later and hit with federal terrorism charges, and that's when the most infuriating details began to surface. Court records show he'd been arrested at least 72 times over 3 decades, including assaults, arson, attacks on social workers, and other violent charges, yet was still out on electronic monitoring at the time of the attack. Prosecutors even revealed he had a pending aggravated battery case from earlier this year for attacking a hospital employee, showing a pattern of escalating violence that no one managed to stop. Bethany's friends later described her as a gentle, soft-spoken woman, an honor student, an animal lover, and someone who greeted everyone with kindness, making the randomness and brutality of the attack even harder to comprehend. The case has sparked national outrage over how someone with a rap sheet that long was free to carry out such a horrific attack, while Bethany remains in critical condition. In the summer of 2025, Jordan Peterson nearly died after developing pneumonia and sepsis that left him in the ICU for weeks. His daughter later revealed that the illness began after he was exposed to heavy mold while cleaning out his late father's basement, triggering what she called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, a rare and unofficial life-threatening immune condition. He reportedly suffered nerve nerve damage, extreme sensitivities to medication, and even paralysis. It wasn't the first time Peterson's health had spiraled. Years earlier, he'd endured a near-fatal benzodiazepine withdrawal that required months of treatment abroad. This latest crisis left him bedridden and fighting for his life once again, with his daughter saying that for days, doctors weren't sure if he'd survive. Now, months later, Peterson is slowly recovering. He's reportedly regained much of his mobility, is speaking and reading again, and continues intensive physical therapy from home. His daughter says he's still very fragile but improving daily, though his public appearances, lectures, and recordings remain on hold as he focuses on regaining full strength after what she called the closest he's ever been to dying. This photo shows 23-year-old Jaleel Smith Riley breaking down in tears as he receives a life without parole sentence in a Cincinnati courtroom for the 2013 fatal shooting of 22-year-old Portia Brooks during a botched car robbery. He had attempted to retract his guilty plea and expressed remorse, but the judge denied both motions, citing the brutality of the crime. In the courtroom, the victim's mother held her daughter's ashes, while her sister said the sentence was the only just outcome for the loss inflicted on her family. At age 21 in 1974, Robert Maudsley strangled John Farrell to death after Farrell showed him photos of abused children. He then turned himself in and went on to kill a convicted child molester at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, and in 1978 murdered 2 more predatory cellmates in a single afternoon, coldly telling the guards there will be 2 short on the roll call. Deemed too dangerous even for high-security inmates, in 1983, authorities locked him in a Hannibal Lecter-like glass cage in the basement of an English prison. He typically spends 23 of every 24 hours alone there with no contact with other prisoners. By 2023, he had spent a record 16,000 days in solitary and will likely remain in isolation for the rest of his life. During the 1980s, Rebecca Schaeffer was the star of the popular CBS sitcom My Sister Sam. But in 1989, she was fatally shot in the doorway of her West Hollywood apartment by an obsessed fan who had been stalking her for over 3 years. The 21-year-old's death led to the passing of some of the first anti-stalking laws in America. This devastating photo was taken by Tom Stoddard during the Sudanese famine in 1998. It shows a well-nourished Sudanese man stealing a bag of corn from a starving child after it was given to him by a charity. Here's a photo of the unidentified victims of John Wayne Gacy being laid to rest at a mass funeral. In 2006, 18-year-old Ryan Waller was shot in the face during a Phoenix home invasion. His girlfriend was killed, but Ryan somehow survived. However, police mistakenly treated Ryan as a suspect, not a victim. Despite a severe bullet wound in his head, Ryan was interrogated for hours and denied medical treatment. He eventually passed away as a result of the horrific negligence. The Rugrats never happened theory states that the Rugrats were all a figment of Angelica's imagination, invented by her to cope with her parents being absent from her life. Proponents of this theory list tragic backstories for each of the babies. Chucky died in 1986 along with his mother, explaining why Chaz is always such a nervous wreck. Tommy was stillborn in 1988, which explains why Stu is always making toys in his basement as a coping mechanism for the son he never had. The DeVilles had an abortion in 1990, and Angelica couldn't figure out whether the baby would be a boy or a girl, so she created the twins Phil and Lil. Eventually, Angelica grew up and stopped having these delusions, until she began experimenting with various narcotics in her teenage years, bringing her back to her childhood and the creations she'd obsessed over. This would explain how all the Rugrats return in the sequel series All Grown Up. Eventually, the show was canceled after Angelica died from a drug overdose at the age of 13. Fans of the show Hey Arnold have always questioned why Arnold lives with his grandparents while the show makes no mention of his actual parents. People have theorized that it's because Arnold's grandparents are his true parents and lied to him about his parents being explorers. Arnold's football-shaped head is merely a case of hydrocephalus, a birth defect that causes fluid to build up in the brain. Since the risk of birth defects can significantly increase among older couples, Arnold's grandparents likely blamed themselves for his condition and couldn't bear to tell him the truth about his parentage. The theory even goes so far as to say his name came from a form of hydrocephalus called Arnold-Chiari malformation. As a result of his condition, Arnold was bullied and had no friends, so all the characters in the series are simply a product of his imagination. The theory points out that the rest of the characters also have oddly shaped heads, and that Arnold imagined them this way so that he could feel normal. There's a very popular urban legend that claims Walt Disney had his head cryogenically frozen immediately after he died, with the hope that he could be revived in the future when technology makes it possible. This was done because Walt Disney's brain and creative ideas were far too valuable to let die. His head is rumored to be hidden underneath Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean ride or Cinderella's castle. Believers in this theory point to Disney on Ice and the movie Frozen as deliberate attempts by the Disney company to cover up people searching about Walt's frozen head. Over the years, many fans have questioned why Tarzan wears a loincloth even though he was raised by gorillas and should therefore have no concept of clothing. According to one popular theory, it's because he's embarrassed about his massive hammer. Humans are known to have proportionally much longer members than other species of apes, likely as an adaptation from walking upright. Meanwhile, gorilla schlongs can only reach about 2.5 inches at their longest. So Tarzan probably started wearing the loincloth after being viciously bullied for his oversized prick upon reaching puberty.